Hello, welcome to the Paintless Studio. Today we're going to talk about Gamblin. Do you really need all of the Gamblin whites? What is Torrit gray? And is Gamblin going to be the best paint for your next painting? All this and more today with the Paint List. My name's Melissa, I'm a professional painter, and I helped found the Paint List. We made Paint List because it needed to exist. On the Paint List, you can look up paint by brand, by pigment code, or by paint name. I use the Paint List to search by pigment code, see which brands have it, discover new paint, and to easily repurchase my paints when I run out. You can heart paints, add them to your favorites, and also see related paints when you create a free login. If you're familiar with the Paint List, you know that we love to do cross-brand comparisons. Today, we're going to focus on Gamblin. And why are we focusing on Gamblin? Because when we asked which of 3 brands you wanted to hear about, the answer was Gamblin. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about some of the experiences I've had with Gamblin. I've been painting with Gamblin paints for years, and I've also worked with Gamblin paints in very large quantities, which is where I began to really notice some of the things that gave rise to the kinds of comments that I make on the Paint List. When you have a paint on your palette, it's pretty customary to be able to adjust that paint in multiple ways with mediums, with more oil, with different things to get a paint to do what you want it to. I do a lot of realistic painting, and I really hadn't noticed just how impasto Gamblin paints can be until I started doing a large color mixing project where I was mixing quantities of paint to make my own convenience blends. That is when I noticed a certain kind of gel-like consistency. Also, the impasto quality of Gamblin. So Gamblin could be a very good paint if you are interested in impasto effects. If you like a very thick or maybe sculptural paint, Gamblin might be a great paint for what you're trying to do. We have a series of videos on the Gamblin paints that we happen to have. All of the paint we review is paint that we've purchased ourselves because I just feel like that is what makes a good review. We don't have all of the Gamblin paints, but we have a lot of them, and we wanted to share with you what our experiences were with those various paints. So you can find those videos, they're linked below. We're going to take a high-level view of the brand as a whole. When I sat down to make these color wheels, I wanted to sort of standardize it a little bit. So I took the range of cadmiums, I took some standard colors like phthalo green, phthalo blue, ultramarine, quinacridone magenta to make a color wheel to kind of just say, you know, what if I only limited myself to this brand? I paint with a lot of brands, so I thought, what if I only am just using Gamblin? Kind of what can I get with this? And something I noticed was this impasto quality. So when we say impasto, sometimes there's an almost like gritty or not crystalline, but like a clay-like impasto. There's also a sort of gel-like impasto, and different Gamblin colors have one or the other going on there. So if you go to the Paint List and search oil paints for Gamblin, you'll see the range of Gamblin paints. And in that range, there are just a few notable callouts. So Gamblin is doing something interesting with their radiant colors. Their radiant colors are convenience mixtures, mostly mixed with titanium white. And these could be really good colors if you're going to make that blend on your palette a lot anyway. I'm a fan of several of the radiant colors. I've used their magenta, used their radiant purple. There's just a few that are callouts. Something you're going to want to make sure and do is maybe your own light fastness testing. Some of those colorants like PV23 can kind of have a little bit of variance of light fastness between brands. Gamblin is doing some interesting things with neutrals. So we were curious about the Gamblin range of whites, which a lot of them have PW6, which is a titanium white, as the main ingredient or the only pigment listed, and yet these whites behave really differently. So they have some interesting things going on with white. We'll get into that. They also have a chromatic black, which is a color that I personally tend to mix a lot. It's got a magenta and a green, so it behaves very differently from their Mars black, if you're familiar with that color. Another interesting thing that we see in the Gamblin brand is their reclaimed earth colors. That is a fun project. You can read more about that on their website. You can't talk about Gamblin without talking about Torrit gray. So Torrit gray is basically an amalgamation of all of their colors, which have been cleaned out of an air filter at the end of the year. So this color is going to be a different blend every year. It has every pigment that they use theoretically, because, you know, maybe it got caught in the air filter. And it's just a fun thing, and we have a little homage to Torrit gray at the end. Let's take a look at their cadmium colors. Gamblin is known for having really high chroma cadmiums. These are very viscous colors. These are impasto colors. However, when I was testing them for this video, specifically paying close attention to the similarities and differences between each color, I noticed that Impasto quality actually varied from cadmium to cadmium with Gamblin, so several of the colors were easier to work with than some of the others. Let's take a quick look at the Gamblin Phthalos. So it was actually while working with the phthalo colors that I first began to notice that gel-like quality that I mentioned earlier. That was actually working with the Gamblin Phthalo Green. So that's a quality that you'll notice in their phthalo blue, their phthalo green, several other colors. Something that I like about the Gamblin brand is that they, like several other brands, have two phthalo greens. So there's a PG7 and a PG36. And I really love the extra flexibility that PG36 offers. Let's take a look at the tinting strength in Gamblin. So when we're talking about tinting strength, I tend to look in the genuine cadmiums, the genuine cobalts, and the genuine ceruleans. And speaking only of cadmiums here, the tinting strength in Gamblin is pretty decent. I would say that in regards to a couple of other different brands, we have really specific cross-brand comparisons on the paint list under reviews. And at the time of publishing this video, some of our Gamblin reviews are still upcoming, so we're previewing them here. And I would say that the Gamblin tinting strength ranges from moderate to decent. There are definitely brands that go higher in certain colors. A couple of colors where the tinting strength is nice in Gamblin is their cobalt blue. If you like the Gamblin consistency overall, their cobalt blue actually did pretty well in our tinting comparisons. And so did actually the ultramarine blue when compared with several different professional tier artist grade paints, while not yet going into kind of luxury paint territory. Let's talk a little bit about Gamblin's convenience mixtures. There are a lot of different things we could say, but let's just take a quick look at some of their convenience screens. Now, I'm a big fan of mixing your own convenience screens, but I really fell in love with the Gamblin Chartreuse, which is actually more of a yellow than a green. So I wanted to just make a note of that, as well as I also wanted to say that we recently reviewed their Gamblin Cadmium Green. This is one I've worked with a lot. It's a little bit less high chroma than I had initially thought when I purchased it, so I wanted to toss that out there for anyone who is looking for a really bright green. This one is actually a little bit toned back. Their Cadmium Green and their Permanent Green are a little bit yellower in hue than some of the other paints out there that go by the similar names. They have a lot of other interesting convenience blends. We already talked about their radiant colors, and you could check them all out over on the paint list. Let's take a brief look at 3 of the Gamblin white paints. Now, Gamblin has a huge range of white paints. We're just looking at the ones that contain PW6 titanium white. These 3 paints behave totally differently, and we're talking about Gamblin's radiant white, their flake white replacement, and their normal titanium white. There is a whole in-depth video on this, which is linked below. The Gamblin Radiant White was the strongest tinter. It was also really light and fluffy. The Gamblin Flake White replacement let the most color through and had totally different working properties. The normal Gamblin White had that classic Gamblin Impasto feeling. And like I said, you can find out more about all 3 of these Gamblin Titanium Whites linked below. Now let's talk a little bit about Gamblin's formulation changes. These are just a few formulation changes that we know about. If you've experienced any formulation changes, let us know in the comments. So Gamblin has had a formulation change somewhere along the line with their Phthalo Blue, and there was a bit of confusion about this when I was working with some things with the paint list, and I reached out to Gamblin. So in the past, it looks like it was PB15.1. It's now PB15.2. Another couple of formulation changes may have to do with wider changes in the pigment industry. And for our subscribers, you can go to paintlist.com and subscribe to our newsletter. We shared changes that Golden relayed from what they were seeing in the wider pigment industry, having to do with alizarin crimson, which also impacted Gamblin. So depending on how much of a pigment a particular manufacturer has in stock depends how long it will be available, but it really looks like alizarin crimson is on the way out. So Gamblin announced that they would be having some changes to their professional line. I believe it's no longer available in the can form, as well as that they were making changes to their 1980s student line as well. Gamblin also recently announced that they made some changes to their Indanthrone Blue PB60. PB60 is still going to be the same chemical pigment, the same chemical composition for the pigment, but now it's going to be a little bit of a different hue. And Jackson's did an interesting comparison of the old one and the new one in case that is a pigment that is a favorite on your palette. It is now time for our homage. to the penultimate convenience color, Gamblin's Torrit Gray. And I say penultimate not because it is the most useful convenience color or even the most beautiful, but simply because it wins by containing all of the pigments. And we decided to sort of take our inspiration from Gamblin gathering up all of the pigment left over from the end of a year in their air filter by taking up all of the pigments and colors that we used for making this video and mixing them all together in our very own Torrit Gray inspired blend. Thanks so much for watching. What I want to hear from you down below in the comments are, what are your favorite Gamblin paints? What do you use them for? What do you like about them? Have you had any weird experiences? We want to hear about that too. Together we can all learn more. Thanks so much for watching, and happy painting.